Hey everyone, welcome to the video version of the Reviving Vet Med podcast. Today, we're diving into the topic of workplace appreciation. This might seem simple on the surface, but it can have a profound impact on burnout, engagement, and team culture in vet medicine. I'm thrilled to welcome back to the podcast Jolene Watson. Jolene is a high energy speaker and is well known as Canada's networking expert. She's the president of Clarity Coaching and Development, a registered veterinary technologist, certified Myers-Briggs practitioner, executive business coach, emotion-centered coach, emotional regulation practitioner, and best-selling author. She's also a 7-time Business Excellence Award winner who specializes in stress management, leadership, communication styles, and emotional regulation. In today's episode, Jolene and I explore why workplace appreciation matters so much in vet medicine, who is most likely to feel overlooked, and how both team members and leaders can show appreciation in meaningful and realistic ways. We also discuss the link between appreciation and burnout, the emotional labor that often goes unnoticed in practice, workplace appreciation languages, and how making appreciation part of culture can boost morale, communication, and retention. I can't wait to share this amazing episode with all of you. So let's go ahead and get into my conversation with Jolene Watson. Welcome back to the podcast, Jolene. I am so happy to have you joining us again.
You are most welcome.
So, you speak a lot about stress, emotional regulation, and leadership. And I am wondering, from your perspective, why is workplace appreciation such a critical issue in veterinary medicine right now?
Well, we know in veterinary medicine, we're already short-staffed, not just our veterinarians, our veterinary techs, our vet techs, and our front end. So it's all across the board. So we need more team members, number one. What's interesting, Psychometrics Canada did a study right before the pandemic, and then they redid that study right after the pandemic, and career development doubled in importance. And it's one of the number one reasons of the great resignation that happened during the pandemic in veterinary medicine and across other industries. And what that means is if I'm not feeling appreciated, my skill sets aren't being recognized, people are leaving. And not just jobs, but industries at times. So it's even more important in veterinary medicine because we're already at that place where we're looking for more team members. So that's the career development piece is really important in terms of workplace appreciation.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because that's not something that I think about when I think of workplace appreciation. In vet med, I think about pizza parties and, donuts in the break room. And you're right, the literature shows, especially among veterinary technicians and technologists, that they need to feel that they are moving somewhere in their career. And so, in essence, appreciation would look like your employer helping you to advance, to learn new skills, to use your skills, to move into a higher position within your career. So I'm really glad that you brought that up and you offer that reframe. I think you and I both know that many veterinary professionals say that they love their work, they love helping animals, they love helping people, but yet they feel exhausted and undervalued. And again, I think the research shows that it is very much our technicians and technologists and nurses that tend to feel the least valued within the practice. How do you feel that a lack of recognition and feeling unrewarded contributes to that burnout, to that emotional exhaustion, and those other symptoms we see, despite people really being passionate about vet medicine?
Yeah, and this, I'm going to bring personality into it because it's one of my favorite things. But when we're acutely or chronically stressed, we often flip our personality type to something that's not natural for us. It's very out of character. And sometimes we think that's who we become. So that stress is there. The cortisol is really high to begin with, and how appreciation actually impacts that. And I can speak from experience when Dr. Stocking and I opened the Cat Hospital of Saskatoon, and this was like over 15 years ago. We didn't have a lot of money in the beginning for team members. So we worked a lot of overtime. There was a lot of long days. But because she appreciated me daily, she was so grateful. And it went both ways. I had no problem staying late, going above and beyond. And I didn't burn out because my passion was there, but it was recognized of the extra work that I was doing. And so I think just that extra layer can make a difference. And of course, work-life balance is important, but you're not always going to get your 15-minute break or your lunch break. So you really need to go above and beyond that to the bigger purpose of what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring that up because I think I can think back to roles that I've been in. I remember when I was in academia, it honestly felt like my dream job. I was so passionate about helping students, doing research projects, working in the clinic, building new elective rotations, mentoring my graduate students, all of these things. And yet when it came time to getting my annual review feedback and connecting with, leadership within the hospital and within the university, I didn't feel valued. I felt like they expected that I should be doing more. And I felt like I was doing as much as I could to the point where I was feeling burnt out, being on call 50% of the time, sharing the workload in a very busy ICU with my colleague. And that really added to my dissatisfaction and to my sense of overwhelm because yeah, it was my favorite job I think that I've had to date. I absolutely loved it. And yet, when that value and that recognition isn't there for the amount of work that we're putting in, I certainly can attest to the fact that it almost like sucked the wind right out of my sails, so to speak.
And
Yeah.
I still remember that same doctor. She was the best leader I've ever had, hands down. And I've had many before I became an entrepreneur. I remember it was about 2 years in, and I mentioned casually that I would love Fridays off. And, if we could get another team member. And she's like, oh, yeah, you just hire someone. You figure that out. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah, whatever you want. She's like, you're amazing. Do whatever you need to do. But the other part was I said to her, I really want to focus on dentistry and it's my passion. And, 15 years ago, I was doing the extractions. I know the rules have changed since then, but she flew a veterinary dentist in from a different province for days to train me to make sure that I could become the expert. And, 15 plus years later, I am still so grateful. And I still think so highly of her for just going above and beyond. And that goes back to the career development piece that she truly cared what lit me up.
That's fantastic. So you shared your passion and she totally leaned into it. I mean, what a wonderful feeling to know that someone sees you, they validate you, they get you, and they want to help propel you further down your career. And of course, that's going to serve her and her practice as well, but you can just feel that there is real care and yeah, wanting to help you and wanting to offer that support. So I love that. Great example. I'm wondering, I have mentioned my perspective and what the research shows that it really seems like veterinary technicians and technologists feel the least valued in veterinary practices. I'm wondering who you think, maybe I'm missing another group, but who do you feel is most likely to feel underappreciated or undervalued? And why does that happen? Why do particular individuals feel that way?
So I'm going to take a different spin on this because I am a vet tech and I totally understand the world of vet teching, 25 years as a registered vet tech, but it's the owners. And I've been doing this 25 years. I've been doing team building with veterinary practices for 12 years, and I've become very close friends with some of the private clinics and the owners. And they give everything. They're often there 18 hours a day. Sometimes they don't take days off. They spend a lot of money on wages, benefits, the pizza parties, the birthdays, and often it goes unnoticed. They don't get thanked. They're not appreciated. The team doesn't do appreciation upwards, it's expected downwards. And so I hear that side of it consistently. And so whenever I do workshops with personality, I always add appreciation, but I always say, don't forget about your leaders because it is lonely at the top. And entrepreneurship, and you know this as an entrepreneur, we are more prone to mental health issues because we're taking on so much and it's long hours and it's a lot. And so I think sometimes we forget about our leaders and the front end. There was a couple instances in my veterinary career where I helped out in the front as a receptionist or veterinary office assistant and because they didn't need a vet tech at that time. And this was when I was already running my business. I was just helping out. That was probably the most stressful job I have ever had in my 29 years in the workforce. And you're juggling so many tasks. There's people lined up to pay. You're needed in the back, perhaps to help restrain an animal. You have to remember which dog goes with which person. And if somebody's upset and their emotions are elevated, you're the front line. And they're usually calm by the time the veterinarian comes out. So I think we often forget about that level of stress as well. And they almost need more reinforcement from everyone on the team. Not to discount the vet techs for sure, but I think sometimes we forget about the other levels within veterinary medicine.
I'm so glad that you shared that. And I want to echo exactly what you're saying because my mom was a practice owner, and I grew up working in practice. First of all, I worked all the positions in the hospital. And I agree with you, and I say this all the time when I'm talking to veterinary audiences. The team members at the front have the hardest job in the practice. They are the ones that are collecting people's money, giving people, the final tally of whatever they owe, handing over the ashes of animals when their families come back, going over euthanasia costs, answering phones, looking at people in the waiting room when they've been waiting for 30, 45 minutes to an hour. I couldn't agree more. And to your point about practice owners, 100%, and I completely overlooked them as a member of the team. And of course, they're a member of the team. And this is something I hear so frequently in my leadership training as well, is that they just feel like, yeah, they do these things, they try to support their team, and yet they feel like who's supporting me, who's checking in on me, who's saying thank you. And I can remember several years around Christmas time when my mom would usually write out checks for annual bonuses for the team. And she would come home and she would just lament that, only maybe one person among her 15 members of the team came in and thanked her for their annual bonus, and just how dejected she felt, like it would be so taken for granted that you would have this money that was given to you. So I felt bad because I could see the loneliness in that ownership and leadership role. And you're absolutely right. Appreciation does not always need to come from the top down. It needs to come from down up. And it can't just be clients to the team. I think clients give a lot of thank you to the veterinarian, like, oh, all hail the veterinarian. They've saved our animal. We need to thank each other as team members. And I speak to myself as a veterinarian that I want to make sure that I might be getting thanks from the client, but I couldn't do the work that I do without every single person on the team. And so we really need to be thanking each other as well.
Yeah, I still remember I worked at a company once that had 50 plus employees, and our CEO always let us off Friday afternoons on long weekends. It was almost a ritual. He would just do it. And I would always walk over to his office across the building and thank him. And I think the fourth or fifth time he said, there's only two people out of 50 that thanked me. And he goes, I appreciate it, but we're never doing this again. Done. And everyone deserved that, because how do you not say thank you? And so to your point with your mom example, my goodness, don't forget to be grateful. And back in my day, we didn't even get sick days. Legally, you didn't have to pay someone for a sick day. And I still remember Dr. Stocking contributed to my RRSPs. I thanked her every month when that went into my account, because how amazing that she would do something like that. And nowadays it's just expected. Clinics are competing with each other, but I think we forget the cost behind all of those amazing things that our leaders do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a great reminder. Well, we know that there's a ton of emotional labor in veterinary medicine, right? Not just the physical lifting of animals and the standing over dentistries and, working on them for hours. That emotional labor often goes unnoticed. And I'm wondering, what other kinds of contributions do you think are overlooked in the veterinary space? And over time, what impact does that have on individuals within the team?
I think we'll stick with emotions just for a moment. I just got certified as an emotional regulation practitioner. I was already an emotion centered coach. But something in veterinary medicine that is very particular to our industry and healthcare in general is empathy fatigue. What I learned when I memorized 67 emotions was that empathy is really when you put yourself in someone else's shoes, you feel what they feel. And I think it's important to develop that skill. But then I learned the definition of compassion, and everybody lives in their own interpretation of emotions and how they describe it. But how it was described to me is that compassion is giving the gift of your presence and your effective listening. You do care, but you choose not to take on someone else's emotions, even if you could. And if I would have learned that 25 years ago, I wouldn't have left the industry. So I kept my certification, but I worked in many different industries over the years because of that heavy toll. And I think it's overlooked sometimes, when you have a euthanasia and then there's a puppy coming in and you have to emotionally agile, I call it. You have to, in the moment, change your emotions, get really excited, even though you're in the grief stage at that moment. And, I still remember it was 14 years ago, there was a cat named Bruce, and the owner just didn't have money and he was trying. He was borrowing from everyone that he knew. We ended up doing a lot of free, labor and blood work and such because we cared so deeply, which again, not good for the bottom line of a business. But we had to euthanize him eventually. And I still get emotional when I think about it because I became so attached. And I remember the veterinarian saying, I know this was really hard on you. Like, take some time, whatever you need. She would always check in on me. And I think sometimes emotionally we forget, even if it's an 8-hour day, you didn't work overtime, but if it was heavy, not to lose that impact of the emotional drain that perhaps that day had. So that's also a level of appreciation, just to recognize someone's emotions, let them experience it. So emotional agility is one of the hardest things to do, which is to quickly change your emotions in the moment, dial them up, dial them back. And we become experts at that in veterinary medicine.
I love that, especially from a well-being advocacy perspective. And leadership trainer, I can't stress enough the importance of those check-ins. And it's not just like a one and done kind of thing, right? Because we're humans and we have feelings and we have experiences, and not all of us are so good at compartmentalizing. And you and I, especially being sensitive individuals, like we are really going to take in what is happening around us. And not everybody has the skills that you teach to know how to regulate and to know how to manage that. And so you don't have to fix it. This is something I tell people a lot. Like they're like, oh, I don't want to ask somebody if they're okay because I don't want to make it worse, or I don't want to say the wrong thing. And it's like, there's no right thing to say. You're just asking them how they're doing. You're being, like you said, with the definition of compassion, sitting with them and almost just holding space for whatever it is they're feeling. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to give advice. You don't have to do anything other than just, how are you doing? That was really hard. You've had a tough day, whatever it is. And again, it goes back to that human need to feel seen and recognized and understood by the people around us. So I'm really glad that you bring that up.
That reminds me of I actually have my emotional regulation cards out, but dignity, which is I am worthy, I decide. So
Mhm.
feeling seen, that's the emotion that we're really helping our coworkers when we check in
Mm.
on them. The other thing I learned this 10 years ago was if you say to someone, I'm sensing you're feeling frustrated, I'm sensing this. If you're wrong, they'll correct you, but then at least you understand where they're at. And you're
Mhm.
not saying you are frustrated. I'm sensing this. So you're taking out that, labeling someone.
I love that. And that is, in essence, offering that empathy, right? Putting yourself in their shoes. And I tell people this all the time, whether it's students that are just learning communication or individuals who've been in the field for a long time and they're relearning how to communicate with emotionally unregulated clients. And it is that offering, right? I sense this. And like you said, even if they say, no, I'm not angry, I'm just frustrated, or I'm not frustrated, I'm scared because you're telling me he's going to die, whatever it might be. So I love that, just that subtle change in wording so that it doesn't feel like you're putting yourself in the expert seat and knowing exactly what they're experiencing, but that you're offering this observation that you're having. So thank you for that.
I remember I was working at a clinic just part-time at one point, and the veterinarian was talking to one of our clients, and the client was very upset about the bill, said that she did not, she did sign the estimate, but so she was just really stressed. And I remember the veterinarian was very calm, patient, and she said, wait a minute, you're right in the middle of finals, aren't you? And she was a veterinary student, our client, and she goes, yes. And she goes, oh my goodness, that must be so hard. I remember. And then they started talking. And in the end, our client said, you know what? I probably did sign that estimate and I probably did, but I've got so many things on my mind and the calmness, but it was just that deeper understanding. But that just reminded me of that situation that it de escalated very quickly with that acknowledgement.
Yeah, what I'm hearing there is that they found a common ground, right? They found that commonality, that shared interest, that shared experience. And I think sometimes our clients really need that. Whether it's, yeah, yeah, I've euthanized a pet before and it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do, or I was in a really emotionally tight situation last year, and I remember having to weigh the cost of the surgery that my dog needed with what I could actually afford, like having these shared experiences. I think that goes for our team members as well, right? Is sharing in those experiences, been there, done that, or, I get it. We all have stuff outside of work that is tugging on us, and sometimes we don't show up the best version of ourselves because of that. And so, really holding space for each other as human beings is, I think, one of the biggest kindnesses that we can offer.
I agree.
Yeah. I know that I mentioned pizza and donuts. I think people often think about appreciation as saying, good job, and I hear people even saying, I just really appreciate you. Thank you for the work that you do. And I don't know. I tend to feel that some of these things can fall flat. And I'm wondering how you would define and differentiate praise, recognition, and genuine appreciation. And why is there a distinction there?
I think genuine means you actually put some thought into it. You're more in the moment. And I never take it lightly. If somebody's busy and they say thank you as they're running by, I still appreciate that. But when you have the time, especially if you're in a leadership position or with your coworkers, thank them, tell them why. What was the impact? And if you can add an emotion into that, I am so grateful because you did this. Here was the impact. When you add a little bit of weight to a compliment, some people remember that for a lifetime. And so if we can do that a little more often, I know we're busy individuals and sometimes a thank you is all you can get out, but we crave time with our leaders as well. I think that's something I didn't mention yet, and leaders forget about that. So even once a month, once every couple of weeks, go for coffee with each team member. See what's on your mind. How are you doing? Just that, again, check in with your leader. And we crave it. I still remember craving it back in the day with every leader I had. So just that extra layer of quality time, which we'll get into later, but just creating that space and just a few extra seconds to provide weight to a compliment makes it a little bit more authentic, a little bit more genuine. And even if it's paper, somebody writes you a note, some people save those notes for a lifetime. So spend some time with your compliments.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like that genuine appreciation is tying the why, the impact. And I remember when I learned that, um, I was working a shift. This was a couple of years ago when my daughter was still very young, and she was in daycare, and I had to get to daycare to pick her up. And it's one of those things where, every minute that you're late to daycare, they charge you $20 or something ridiculous. And I was like, I had to go. And one of the interns or ER doctors, I can't recall, took a case that had just come in and was like, I've got this, you go. And when I circled back to them the next day to really thank them, I said, that really made the difference for me. I felt so relieved because I was able to leave and pick up my daughter on time without having to pay these extra fees at her daycare. So really just to demonstrate like that wasn't just like a no big deal. Yeah, I took the case, but that made a real difference for me. And it sounds like then if we praise someone, we're telling them that they did something well. And when we're recognizing someone, we're acknowledging a job well done. Would you say that that's the case? But then it's not really taking it a step further.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
adding that weight of why. And
Yeah.
emotions, man. I just love emotions. If you can just add in, I felt this way because you did this,
Yeah.
people remember that.
Yeah. Well, and nobody can argue with it, right? Like I know we have a habit, especially us Canadians, of saying, oh, psh, that was no big deal, or that's okay, or it was nothing. But you can't actually dispute if I say, oh, I was so relieved and so grateful. Somebody can't say like, oh, no, you weren't. It's like, no, that was my experience. So I really appreciate that. Well, you touched on one of the workplace appreciation languages just a moment ago when you mentioned quality time. And I know that this is something that you teach many different teams. This is something that you introduced to me many years ago. I find it fascinating. I'm wondering if you can briefly talk about the workplace appreciation languages and why knowing these are so important. Why does this up the ante from that one size fits all approach of pizza lunches that so many of us have used before?
But it all started with marriage, the five love languages, and that's where this it's still free, it's online, the questionnaire, and it deeply impacts marriages if you understand someone's appreciation style. Then they related it to the workplace, and now it's monetized. The MBA inventory is what it's called. And it's very inexpensive, but you can actually get your team members to go online and find out what their workplace appreciation styles are and why this is important that everybody's very different. And we'll start with words of affirmation, which is my top. I redo it every 6 months, and that has never changed over the last decade. Words of affirmation is where somebody says thank you. Obviously, it's deeply meaningful if they provide that impact, the emotion, and the why. But it can also be written. It could be a card. It could just be you sit down with them. It might be a performance review, but words are deeply meaningful or hurtful if they're said in a different way. Or for an example, I had a boss once who would always tell me what I did wrong, and words matter to me. And so I had my resignation letter ready. And it wasn't until he realized that, oh, yeah, I like words of affirmation and that I was a feeler in the Myers Briggs. So I deeply appreciated positive reinforcement. He had pages of what he appreciated that he had written out. He was going to promote me to client relationship manager. He was going to pay for courses, but he didn't say any of that. And I remember him saying, when I tell you what you've done wrong, it's because I see so much potential. But that's not how I took it. And so that's just one example on the words of affirmation and how profound it can be if that is someone's style. The second one, quality time. A lot of people score really high in this one. And that could just be going for coffee with a coworker if you've had a rough day. Put your cell phone away, give them your presence, be fully there, be a great listener. The other thing that I would actually put into this category, which was my favorite, professional development. Quality time with yourself, with instructors, learning something you're deeply passionate about. To me, that meant more than a raise. It meant more than time off. And so that could also fit in the category of quality time. I had a scientist client, not in the veterinary world, but she loved animals. She gave pet eternity. When somebody got a puppy or a kitten, they got a week paid. And if it was an older cat from a pound, still they got the week. It didn't have to be a puppy or kitten because she wanted to make sure that they understood that she understood the bond, that unconditional love, and the importance that is in the very beginning stages to earn that trust. And that it was just so sweet. And I really think we should do that in veterinary medicine as well. It just makes sense. So that would be a really fun example of quality time. Then acts of service. Now, this one in marriage would be taking out the garbage, doing the dishes, but in the workplace, it's also task oriented. So if you mentioned when that person took over your case, or if I'm doing a dental and I need to wash the instruments because something else is coming up, someone else does that for me. The one thing that I used to do in veterinary medicine for my team, but also in other clinics that I worked with, was just to give them a really simple Excel spreadsheet. And you would write down all your tasks and then rate them. What do I love doing? What do I not like doing? What would I give away? What do I want to learn more about and maybe get better at? And then you start to disperse tasks throughout your team members. I remember there was a vet tech that I worked with that loved putting soft paws on fractious cats. She loved the challenge. I didn't. So, I mean, you take them all, right? Like I know how if I need to, if you're not here. And she let me do all the dentals because that wasn't her favorite. So if you can trade tasks, that really does fit into that acts of service, and it can make a huge difference in how we love our jobs, the retention. And then the last one, tangible gifts. Now this one, I know it seems trivial, but if I am having a really rough day and my coworker brings me a green tea latte, which is my favorite, it can change my state instantaneously. Gives you that shot of dopamine. You just feel so appreciated that they remembered what you like. It could be a card that you send out on someone's birthday. Another example of this, I remember I had a leader once that was giving out sports jerseys with our company logo and hats. And he was so excited, and he must have somehow figured out everyone's sizes, and he was walking around. And I don't like sports. I don't watch sports. And I was like, I'm going to pretend that I'm really excited because he went above and beyond. And when he got to me, I'll never forget, he said, I know you don't do sports. He goes, but I know you like Lululemon. So go pick out whatever you want. You have a $200 budget and you just need to put the logo. It was such a simple thing, but he knew me so well. And I think if you're going to get someone a gift and they're gluten intolerant, you should probably know that before buying them a cake. So it can go really sideways if you don't deeply understand who you're working with, what they value, who they are outside of work, what's their favorite kind of cake, do they prefer coffee or tea? I know it sounds so simplistic, but it can make such a difference. And when we think about our clients, just giving them that paw print after a euthanasia, that's a tangible gift. That is, they will hold that forever. It's so deeply meaningful. So it's not just with each other, it's also what we do for our clients. And physical touch is the fifth one, which obviously in the workplace, not appropriate. However, I'm gonna touch on this for a second. Huggers. Some people love to hug. It's really important for them. I never hug someone that I don't know. I always watch body language because some people don't like to be touched. But I remember I knew my veterinarians so well and I knew the clients quite well when you'd work somewhere for a long time. And I would pair up certain veterinarians or vet techs when it was a euthanasia type situation if I knew that owner was more of a hugger. So I think you can also really be conscious of who you pair up with who based on their personality, their appreciation styles, and that just goes that deeper level.
Wow, you did such a great job of describing all of these languages. I know for me, I'm an acts of service gal, which is why that taking of the case at the end of the day has stuck with me so much. And it's the same in my romantic relationship. If my fiance can, as you said, take out the garbage, hang up the TV, like whatever tasks, pay the bill, anything that can be alleviating to my day, my workload, my life load, so to speak, can be really, it just is so deeply impactful. Like I thank him all the time for making dinner or whatever it is. It just makes my life easier. So, yeah. And so important to recognize that because, when we talk about why this one size fits all approach doesn't work is you could be doing the opposite of what you experienced, which is dumping all of these words of affirmation on somebody and they're like, whatever, just like I just want a gift card, or I just want to be able to leave work on time one day, or have somebody help me with the, end of day closing down the practice, whatever it might be. So I think really getting to know folks, and that's something I do when I bring team members on board, is I ask them a lot of those questions, right? First of all, I make them do the quiz. I don't make them. I suggest that they do the quiz. And I actually have a veterinary specific quiz that I created around the workplace appreciation languages. So I'll share that in the show notes for everybody. But I ask them to do the quiz. And then I also take note of like, what are their hobbies? Do they drink coffee or tea, or where is their favorite coffee shop, so to speak? What dietary restrictions do they have? All of those different things, so that should I want to present them with any physical sort of gift, that it has been very thoughtful and it's just not some random thing. Because I know as I am not a coffee drinker, I do enjoy other drinks from the coffee shop, but I'm very particular about where I go because they don't always have the drinks that I like. I can't just get coffee somewhere. So giving me a Tim Hortons gift card is not going to go as far as something different. So I can relate. I am wondering, for busy veterinary teams that feel very stretched and short on time, what do you feel are some realistic ways that colleagues, team members can show up and just appreciate each other on a day-to-day basis without having to plan these big things or, stretch themselves too much?
Just to be conscious, be in the moment, be optimistic. That's the other emotion that is actually the most important emotion when it comes to emotional regulation. Out of all 67, I memorized this is the most important, which would mean, let's say the day is chaotic, but you notice something awesome about a coworker. And the definition of optimism is good and bad things happen, but mostly good things happen to me. And if you start thinking that way, you're going to start to look for the silver linings, the sparks of joy. Even on a winter day, if you have a heated steering wheel, spark of joy. If there's a puppy coming in, even if, there's another issue happening in that clinic, it's a spark of joy. And just to pick out those things. And some personalities do that so naturally. Other personalities, I've had clients that actually put reminders in their phone once a week. Remember to compliment so and so. And it's not disingenuine, it's that they think compliments all the time, but they rarely verbalize them. That's not natural. So I think getting out of our comfort zones, which is the platinum rule, treat people the way they want. And you can do that very quickly, even if it's just a thank you as you're running by. If you don't have time to really put thought into it, maybe do that later. But don't forget in the moment just to appreciate. I remember another thing you could do if you have an hour is to set up your team, separate them out into four groups, ideally what their preference is in those areas, and say, come up with 10 ideas for the rest of us that we could do around words of affirmation, that we could do around acts of service. And then have a list so that if you're having a rush day, you could just look at that list and go, oh, yeah, that's something I could easily do for Joan today or once a week. So it doesn't have to be daily, it doesn't have to be hourly. Don't put too much effort into being exhausted about it, but just be genuine, care deeply about people, be as optimistic as you can. It can retrain your brain. It's
I
really,
love that. Yeah, I love that, Jolene, and that really makes it tangible and easy. And what I'm hearing you say is that yeah, we can be very intentional. We can schedule it in. We can have these bigger moments of recognition and work that we put into this, and we can also just on a moment by moment basis experience this optimism. And what that really creates for me is this sense of gratitude, right? If I'm looking for the good in situations, I'm finding things to be grateful for. And it could be just the tiniest little thing, like I don't know, just the way that a team member conducts themselves, the fact that they're always smiling in the morning, the fact that they always say good morning when they see you or whatever it might be, and just to acknowledge that. And the person might not even know that they're doing it. They might not even recognize the impact it's having, but just you highlighting it is going to open up their eyes to that. And I really love that suggestion. I'm wondering from a leadership perspective, if we turn the tables a little bit now and look on the practice managers, the practice owners, et cetera, what do you think are some common mistakes that leaders might make in trying to show appreciation? And how could they shift gears and try to find ways to do this in a more authentic and meaningful way?
that's having the cheat notes, sitting down with each team member, onboarding like you do, but also every 3 months, ideally not once a year, because that's a long time to wait for praise or appreciation. The one tip I wanted to share, and this is one of my previous leaders had done this, is a scorecard. And what he did is he goes, Jolene, I'm just curious what your top 10 needs and wants are. 1 to 10, most important to least important. And then I want you to rate them out of 10, how important they are to you. You can have 2 10s. He's like, I'm just curious. And he gave me a week to do that. And I came back and I said, oh, I want Fridays off. I want all these things. And he did premise it by saying, by the way, I can't do all these things. I just want to know for future. And professional development was number one for me, taking these courses. I had travel, I had all these things, money. And he said, now I want you to rate how happy you are right now in each one of those areas. And it was a simple Excel template, but it gave me a score out of 100. And that really gave him deep insight into what I valued, what was most important to me. And I still remember I did get my Fridays off, but I had to work 4 10-hour days, no problem. I was happy with that. And he ended up paying for 3 courses that year for me, which meant more to me than a raise. But I still remember because he was a thinker in Myers-Briggs, so he was very logical. I had to write him essays proving how I was going to make him money by taking these courses. And I did. And I got my courses, and he was happy. I was happy. I was a better employee. But that scorecard, I know it sounds like such a little thing, but I'd never had a boss ever sit down with me and say, but what's most deeply meaningful to you? And then you could add the appreciation styles, obviously, into that conversation. But I think just that deeper dive, get to know people, and then people feel seen, as you mentioned earlier.
Wow, what an amazing leader and what a great way to gauge someone's deepest needs and desires on the job. So thank you for sharing that. I feel like when appreciation becomes part of the culture in the workplace, we start to see changes within the team, right? When it comes to communication, morale, maybe even retention. What do you see as the real why at the end of all of this? Why is it so important that we create this culture of appreciation within the veterinary workplace?
I think it helps us discover our true purpose. and why we actually came into veterinary medicine. So if, that's why we come in, and then leaders have to learn how to lead, and it's a lot of human stuff in that. But if your coworkers deeply value you, don't judge you. I think that's the most important piece, and that's where appreciation really does make a difference. Or if somebody's having a bad day, not to judge that. And you brought that up as well. Just be curious, right? You're on the same team, you're on the same ship going the same direction. And how can I better support my team? Doesn't matter what area you're working in. I think we all have to think on that same level. And veterinarians, and you can speak to this too, it's not extensive leadership training that they get in veterinary medicine. So how can we help our leaders better lead ourselves? Tell them how you like to be coached. Help them. They can't read your mind. So again, that goes bottom up, which I brought up before, but I think we're all equals, and that emotion is equanimity. It's one of my favorite emotions. Everyone is my equal, and we all have dignity and value.
I love that. Beautiful, beautiful words. Jolene, you've already shared your thoughts on what reviving veterinary medicine means to you in the first episode that we had you on. Building on that, I'm wondering, what do you believe is one small but powerful shift that veterinary workplaces could make around appreciation that could have a lasting ripple effect?
Authentic communication, being present, being in the moment. Don't overthink it. Just just love those around you in the workplace. And I know they're not our family members, but we spend a heck of a lot of time with our coworkers. So how can we make them feel valued, appreciated, seen? And that's going to keep us in this industry. And I think that's something we've always been focusing, but it needs a higher focus. And I'm just so excited. I have it right beside me. It's right over here, your book. I just ordered your book. What you do is so important to our industry. So I just wanted to give you a shout out as well on the mental health side, and just to reignite that passion. And so I also have that same purpose in veterinary medicine, but I wanted to make sure, if people have not ordered your book, phenomenal. I love what you do for this industry. So I just wanted to end with a shout out to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That means so much to me. And I promise our listeners that I did not coerce Jolene into saying that. I didn't know that you were going to say that, but speaking of appreciation for one another, thank you for appreciating me. And I just so appreciate having you on the podcast. You're an incredible guest. You're always so thoughtful and really tangible and practical in what it is that you share. And I know how passionate you are about helping leaders and helping team members. And it's just so wonderful to get to talk to you again. So thank you so
It
much.
was an honor to be here again.